So it'd be okay.
Yes, 2 minutes.
2 or 3 minutes.
2 minutes exactly. We begin. The subject very interesting, the history of the foreign policy. Next year, it will be 80 anniversary of the first visit of the American president to Argentina. The first visit of an American president to Argentina.
Which would have been Herbert
Roosevelt. 1936, 80 anniversary.
Hoover came to, Hoover did a South American trip. He did not make it to Argentina. So FDR in 36.
The first president.
FDR in 36. Yes.
The first was 1936. Roosevelt in America. It was in Argentina because it was a meeting at the first conference. With the Congress of America.
It was in Montevideo. Yes, conference in Montevideo.
Buenos Aires. In 1936.
Roosevelt came on a cruise ship. He came on a ship.
Montevideo was in 1907. It was the first was Washington, 1889. And 1936. A long trip.
Let's see. 1933, Cornell held a conference where Cornell first renounced the Roosevelt corollary. Was that in Montevideo? 36 in Havana. The 40 conference was in Havana.
And the first visit was in Roosevelt, 1936. The second is in Havana.
And you remember Richard Nixon came in 1958. Things didn't work. Yes, things were not working out well for him.
And I said, previous to Eisenhower, because Eisenhower visit in February 1960.
And then Nixon came back to Argentina in 1967, or 67 as a pre-presidential candidate.
Saludarnos.
Con mucho gusto.
The vice president of the CAR.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
And the third was Bush father, 1994, Clinton, 1997.
Did he not come? No, he came to the summit of Mike. And then Bush Jr. came in to Valladolid.
2006.
Valladolid.
For the conference of presidents. But the first was this.
Now, for the translation, do they have things to put under here, or how will they get the translation?
No, because all them speak English. If one have necessity, but all them speak English.
So you'll announce that if they don't. Then we have a translator. We have a translator in the back.
But I think all speak English. And after the president, the first year, President Argentina, he was the president, the former president, 1930. This because of the former president this year.
You are in charge.
Buenas tardes. Vamos a comenzar nuestra reunión. The speaker is Dr. Stephen G. Rabe. In my opinion, his specialty. He's a very important historian of the foreign American policy. It is the core of it. Because for the reason, he knows about a lot of subject things. But for this conference, he has choose a very specific and interesting question, ¿no? To speak. The modern American woman. El rol de la mujer estadounidense en el siglo XXI. And for the United States Committee of the CARI, it is a very important subject to know. Because the objective of the committee is to understand the U.S. For the reason this conference will be very important, no, for us. You know, he's professor in Texas, Dallas, and he has wrote a lot of books. He has a lot of, I think, a lot of knowledge about a lot of things. And maybe after the conference, maybe possible to do questions and comments about other things. He knows a lot about the American foreign policy. You have his antecedents, and I think.
All right, thank you very much. And I thank everyone for coming. I thank Kari for inviting me. And of course, I have been introduced. So again, I would just mention, of course, that my research and teaching specialties are in U.S. foreign relations, and particularly U.S. relations with Latin America. So of course, that leaves a question of why am I talking about the modern American woman? But we'll get to that in a second. I'm here, of course, working with Fulbright and teaching a class with Fulbright, of which we have 40 very, very bright university graduates. And they are studying American history with me, modern American history. And they are also studying modern American foreign policy with Professor John Eikenberry of Princeton. So that is why I'm here. And since he is doing foreign policy, I'm sort of doing modern American domestic history, of which one topic is, of course, the role and status of women in American society. Now, I'm going to mention that in our program, there are 22 women in the program, the Fulbright program, who are 22 Argentine women who are graduates of very fine universities, and they're incredibly intelligent. Their ages are between 23 and 29. And so I gain a good deal of insight discussing with them and comparing with them the role and status of women in Argentina with the role and status of young women in the United States. And so hopefully we can bring that into the discussion and conversation. So let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm not going to do something formal in terms of reading a paper to you. But what I'm going to briefly do is go over some key pieces of legislation. And then I'm going to go over some statistics, and they'll all be up here on the board. both social statistics and political statistics, statistics on economics, statistics on sports, statistics on politics. My key thesis will be that basically there has been very, very significant, even revolutionary change in the United States in terms of the role and status of women. A significant amount of change, but clearly equality among men and women has not been achieved in the United States. Right, so that would be my basic thesis. Now, here's what I hope will happen. I hope that we have many questions and discussions. As I understand it, that normally this goes to about 7:45, perhaps 8 p.m. What I intend to do is only take about 40 minutes. Now that I have taught several times in Argentina, and I know that Argentines are not shy, so that I hope we will have much discussion. I hope that we can make comparisons between the US and Argentina and show where there are similarities and where there are differences. And so I hope that we have a good deal of discussion, because in the end, I consider myself a teacher. And so a teacher always strives for discussion and debate. And Argentina, I have taught in 21 countries. There is no better country for discussion and debate than Argentina. That, you know, if I have taught, for example, in Finland, Finnish people are very shy. It is very difficult to get a discussion going. But here I believe we shall have a discussion. I am confident we will have a discussion. So let's look a little bit about what's important in terms of the law, in terms of the United States. Well, the first thing I have up there, of course, is the right to vote. Women gained the right to vote in the United States in 1920. I was very surprised to find out that Argentine women did not gain the right to vote until 1947, which would be very late in the Western world. By and large, in much of the Western world, I think that in Chile, women gained in the 1960s, women often did not have full legal rights in terms of property, in terms of signing contracts, in terms of access to bank money, etc. That often they were still perceived in a sort of dependent status. Now, in the midst of the 1960s, when there's a significant amount of change in the United States, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the youth movement, the gay rights movement, so too, of course, the women's movement really becomes quite important in the 1960s. And one of the first steps was that President Kennedy made a pledge to then the widow of Franklin Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, that if she supported him, that he would try to do something about the role and status of women in American society. So he got passed through Congress something called the Equal Pay Act of 1963. Now, this law, which is still on the books, states that men and women must be paid the same pay if they are working in the same job. Now, on one level, that seems to have reached equality. The problem, of course, is that men and women often work in different types of professions. So while it is illegal to pay a woman less if both a man and a woman are teachers in a collegio or high school, it's illegal to pay them that. Too often, of course, as in the 1960s, women never had a chance to become the rector or principal of the collegio. Or the most obvious issue would be that through much of history, doctors were men and nurses were women. So did doctors and nurses, were they paid equally? Of course not. Of course not. Perhaps some of you have been in a hospital. Who's more important to getting you back to health, the doctor or the nurse? Well, quite obviously, the nurse is far more important, but she was being paid quite a bit less. So while there is this Equal Pay Act, one of the problems that has always persisted is that men work in certain types of profession which are highly paid, and women tend to work in other professions which historically have been low paid. Nonetheless, that was a legislative achievement. The other legislative achievement of keynote here in the 1960s was something called Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Now, Title VII says that women cannot be discriminated against in the workplace. Okay, it's just a passage in this law. It's a very ironic development. The Civil Rights Act was to end segregation and to protect the rights of African Americans. An opponent of the Civil Rights Act was trying to defeat it. He thought he would put in what we would call a poison pill. That is to say, he added this little passage saying the law should also, we should also not discriminate against women. He thought for sure no one would ever pass a piece of legislation that gave equality both to African Americans and to women. Well, to his great surprise, the bill passed, and so we have this particular piece of legislation. This remains, 51 years later, the basic law that protects the rights of women, particularly in work, in that if you feel as a woman you have been denied a promotion because you're a woman, if you feel that somehow or other you're being denied hiring or whatever because you're a woman, you would use this piece of legislation to go to the courts and get rectification. Now, the next one is really important, probably strangely has had more impact. This is called Title IX of the Higher Education Act. Now, this is a simple piece of legislation. This, again, is just Title IX, meaning just a passage, stating that there has to be equality in higher education for men and women. It was intended, I think, to say, stop steering women into home economics or nursing or teaching, open up physics, science, engineering, technology to women. But the big impact of Title IX has been in sports. Title IX says, because we in the United States tend not to have, in the clubs, we tend to run our amateur sports via universities. And so universities were forced to create equal sports facilities for women, as well as, equal to that of men. This has had an incredible impact because US women are the greatest sportswomen in the world. After all, who won the Mundial? For women, it's the US team. I'm very diplomatic, and so I will not tell you what has happened when the Argentine women have played the American women in football. But if someone wants to ask, I will tell you what the scores have been. It's not been a pretty sort of thing. This has been a very, very profound, has had a very, very profound impact in the United States, and it tends to then spread to other types of areas that women's sports heroes become quite prominent in American lives. Now, one or two other things that we should mention here. Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade, of course, is a Supreme Court ruling in 1973 that permits abortion in the United States. It remains, 42 years later, very, very controversial. But nonetheless, it remains the law of the land. Roe versus Wade, which really does come out of this kind of ferment here of the 1960s in terms of equality and rights for women, basically states that in the US, a woman has access to an abortion during the first trimester, during the first 3 months. During the second 3 months, perhaps so, perhaps not. The question of when does life begin. The third trimester, almost certainly not, except in exceptional cases such as the life of the mother. Now, obviously, this bill and abortion remains in 2015, will be in 2016, an issue in the presidential election. Essentially, the two political parties divide. Republicans oppose Roe versus Wade, Democrats support it. You can't run to be the Republican candidate for president unless you are against Roe versus Wade. You cannot run as the Democratic candidate unless you're in favor of Roe versus Wade. But I will tell you that despite all the sound and fury, that basically about 59, 60% of Americans have always supported Roe versus Wade, and it remains the law of the land. And I see it not changing in any way. Now, two or three other things here that I want to mention that are legislative achievements that have some significance. In 1993, and I'll come back particularly to this one because I think it's important because it's so weak, the Clinton administration passed something called the Family Leave Act. This gives a woman who has just given birth to a child or is in the last stages of pregnancy, gives her up to 3 months or 12 weeks to take off from her job and to stay at home either during the last part of the pregnancy or with the newborn. And according to the law, she can return to her job. However, there is no money in this. There's no funding. As you perhaps know, in Nordic countries, in Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, family leave is often 2 to 3 years, where you can, if you are a new mom, you can leave your job for a couple of years, and the state pays you the money that you had been earning, plus you can then go back to your job. They also have a part of their law, and sometimes insist, that if a woman leaves her job for 2 years or so, that her partner or husband must also leave at some point for another year. This is to make it sure that companies continue to hire women, because they might say something, well, you're going to get pregnant, and therefore I'm not going to hire you. So now they're also insisting that men take time off. Now I think, I'll come back to this because I think the fact that this is a very weak family leave law leads to inequality in the United States. Finally, there are a couple of other things that I want to mention here that are of significance. The first piece of legislation that President Obama signed was called the Lilly Ledbetter Act. Lilly Ledbetter was a woman who found out that for 40 years, the company she had been working in was not honoring the Equal Pay Act, that she had been being paid less wages for the same work that she was doing that men were doing. But after finding that this had been going on for decades, she just kind of finally found out they're discriminating against me. So then she went using Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, tried to sue. But then they said, okay, you can sue, but only since the time you knew that you were being discriminated against, not the past 30 years. So President Obama's first piece of legislation was to rectify this. And so now, if you can prove you have been discriminated against in the workforce over a long period of time, you will get all of your pay back. That is now the U.S. law. One other thing, you could see it as an achievement or whatever, but since 2013, U.S. women are allowed to be in military combat. At the present time of U.S. military forces, about 20% of U.S. military forces are female, are women. And of course, actually during both Afghanistan and Iraq, there were many women who were actually in combat in some form or other, and there are many notable cases. There is a Congresswoman from Illinois who plans to run for Barack Obama's seat in the U.S. Senate in 2016, who was a helicopter pilot, and she lost both of her legs. And she's a very famous woman in the United States, a very brave woman, and she's likely to be elected senator from Illinois. But in any case, this is perceived as a step forward in terms of women in combat. Now, a big failure that never happened in the United States was the addition to the U.S. Constitution of the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment was a very simple statement saying that discrimination based on sex is illegal. Discrimination against women is illegal. A very simple statement. In order to amend the U.S. Constitution, you need 38 states or 3/4 of the states to pass this particular amendment. It never got more than 35. It fell 3 states short. And I do not think even in 2015 you could get that 38. Maybe you could, maybe you could not. So this was a major failure. Now, one final thing that I want to mention, the kind of elephant in the room that I have not mentioned. Ultimately, more important than all of this legislation more important than the Equal Pay Act, more important than Title IX of the Higher Education Act, is the development of oral contraceptives. You know, as an historian, I do not see how you can any way overestimate the revolutionary impact of oral contraceptives. I would say that in our kind of historical memory, that the development of antibiotics, penicillin, is probably the most important medical development. It's increased life expectancy. The widespread use of, and the average person in the Western world lived to the age of 50 in 1900. Now the average person lives to 77, 78, 79, depending on the country. That was a revolutionary medical development. I would just rank number 2, oral contraceptives. Oral contraceptives have revolutionized relations between men and women and have really been the underpinning, I think, of the women's movement. Because oral contraceptives gave young women the ability to control their own destiny. At the present time in the United States, 76% of all women who are in the childbearing age use oral contraceptives. In Argentina, it is 78%. How do I know this? Well, I went to the CIA World Fact Book, and the CIA seems to know everything, including how many Argentine women are using oral contraceptives. How they know that, I do not know, but they seem to know. And while being a little bit facetious here, I really don't think you can underestimate the impact of oral contraceptives. It has revolutionized family life. It has revolutionized the relationships between men and women. It has revolutionized the professional careers of young women. It's an entirely a different world because of oral contraceptives. Now, having said that, let's look and see what are some of the changes. Okay. Social statistics on women in the United States. Again, thank you, CIA, that gives me many of these statistics. Life expectancy in the United States today for men is 77, for women is 82. Now, in human history, traditionally men lived longer than women. It's only been in the 20th century that women have begun to outlive men, mainly because women are having fewer children. If you were having in the 19th century, 18th century, 17th century, whatever, 5 to 10 children, you are risking your life. So traditionally, throughout all of human history, men lived longer than women. But in most of the developed world, Europe, Latin America, the United States, there's about a 5-year difference. There is about a 5-year difference in Argentina. Argentines live about 1.5 to 2 years less than people in the US on average. And that's because I've been scolding some of my students in the Fulbright program because still Argentines smoke a little too much. And smoking is keeping this. Okay. All right, marrying age. The average marrying age now it keeps going up every year. It's 29 for men and 27 for women. Okay. Of my 22 Argentine women, 29 to 23, not one is married, not one. Now, these are all young professional women. Now, for college age, the median marrying age for women in the United States, for those who have college educations, law degrees, medical degrees, graduate school degrees, professional degrees, is basically now 30 years of age. Many of the Argentine women were very happy to hear, because I had a couple who were 29, and they were a little antsy that they're not married. They said they had boyfriends, but whatever. But the basic thing now in the United States is that most college-educated women marry between the ages of 30 and 40. Now, of course, this is quite profound in a variety of ways. Most of these young women in the United States or in Argentina are seeking to develop their professional lives. But also, clearly, it means that the size of your family is going to be much smaller. simply because you have delayed the childbearing years. You haven't delayed sex because there are oral contraceptives. Now, some things have not changed. Divorce rates. In the United States, 41% of people divorce who've been married once. I would tell you that college-educated women who delay marriage till after the age of 30 are less likely to divorce. If you marry a second time, there's a 60% chance that your marriage will end in divorce. As it was once said, second marriages, third marriages, fourth marriages are triumphs of hope over experience. If you marry a third time, it's 73%. If you get into, you remember Elizabeth Taylor, who was a serial marrier, or Jacques Namour, when you get up to sixth or seventh marriage, an hour or two it lasts, and then it's gone, or whatever. Okay. Inevitably, fertility has gone down in the United States. The United States population is growing very, very rapidly, but it's mainly growing through immigration now. The United States is at ZPG, meaning at 2.606 children per family, which is zero population growth. Now, the U.S. is growing by 2.5 million people a year, but that's mainly through immigration and because fertility rates among first-generation immigrants are somewhat higher. College-educated women, they on average are having 1.5 children. One child, and then of course one very small child, or something to that effect. So, but that's quite obvious. If you delay marrying age, then the size of families declines. One of the reasons that the United States is very pro-immigration, and we give 1 million green cards a year legally, is because we need to increase the size of the U.S. population, because it's not through replacement value. I think Argentina's fertility rate has come down very, very dramatically. It's about 2.3. I believe that Brazil is at zero population growth. Mexico has come down quite rapidly, down into 2.3, 2.4 children per family. The other large countries in the hemisphere, Colombia is down to 2.3, 2.4, and Canada, as you might suspect, is also around the U.S. level. Births. 59% of all births are by married women. But 52% of births by women under 30 are to unmarried women. It seems to be a phenomenon that non-college educated women frequently are having children without marriage. And I would tell you that there is a new phenomenon in the United States where large numbers of women, both college educated and non-college women, are saying, I want to have a baby, but I don't care if I'm married. And that's, that's very much featured in the media and TV, etc. And I think this is a phenomenon that's first started in Europe, of women having children but not really caring if they were married, and has spread to the United States, and I think is spreading throughout Latin America also. A couple other statistics that I want to go over here in terms of this issue of abortion. There are approximately 1.2 million abortions a year in the United States. Now that has come down quite dramatically because literally there are fewer pregnancies in the United States. 90% of them are in the first trimester, during the first 3 months of pregnancy. Who is the typical person who has an abortion? 16 years, 17 years of age, 18, 19, 20. Very, very young women are those who tend to have abortions. Virtually all abortions are by women under 24 with sort of unwanted pregnancy. Now finally, before I go to the other statistics, I did add one because the students told me this was a big issue in the United States, in Argentina, the issue of sexual violence. Here there's been enormous progress made. Domestic violence is down 50% since 1993. Now, this was a law sponsored by the President, Vice President Joseph Biden called the Violence Against Women Act. That's been in effect now for 22 years. It has brought about an enormous cultural change. Republicans and Democrats argue bitterly, endlessly over abortion. But Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, would thoroughly agree on this new law. And there has been an incredible cultural change. Domestic, a man does not have the right to beat up his wife. It is now considered not only a public issue, but an issue that will be punished with extremely severe penalties. It is the cultural norm. You could put a Barack Obama and Jeb Bush on the same jury, and if they heard that a man had sex with his wife against her will, they consider that rape, and they would send that man to jail for 30 years. As you perhaps know, it's been a big issue in the United States. The comedian, the famous actor, Bill Cosby, was using drugs to seduce women, having them pass out. And so President Obama was asked about that, and he gave a very, very short but powerful statement. He stated that, well, he didn't want to address the particular issue per se because he is the chief executive officer, and so therefore did not want to become legally involved. But he said, any man who gives drugs to a woman to seduce her is a rapist, and that rape was committed here. Also, since 1993, with the Violence Against Women Act, sexual assault is down by 70%, as reported by the FBI, as reported by a variety of legal authorities. There has been an incredible change in the United States. Now, I praised or pointed to family leave in like Finland, Denmark, Norway, but in those countries where they don't have strong laws, violence within the family is still a very big problem, very big problem. But not only do we have laws, but the laws seem to have affected a cultural change, which is clearly related to the women's movement in the United States. And at least as reported by various legal authorities in the United States, there has been an incredible and dramatic decline in sexual violence against women. Apparently, Bill Cosby did not get the memorandum, but there has been a really big decline. Now, let's just go to a couple of other sorts of things. Okay, where are some other big changes where there have been no changes? Basically, men and women in the United States finish high school, finish collegio at about the same rate. But then when you go into higher education, in my field, there has been a total and complete revolution. 56 to 58% of initial degrees are now earned by women. It's heading towards 60%. Most universities and colleges actually try to get a 50-50 split in entering students. But in terms of graduation rates, it's now heading towards 60%. I went to an all-male college in the 1960s. There were 800, it was a small all-male college. There were 800 men. And I never took a course from a female professor, a woman professor. There were no women professors. Now, it's a co-educational college with 1,700, far more women. The president of the college is a woman, and my daughter went to the college. This is just revolutionary. I never could have imagined that my daughter could go to this college that I went to. I never could have imagined I would have a daughter, but certainly I didn't imagine I would have a daughter that went to this college who is headed by the woman. And it's continuing beyond the bachelor degree. 57 to 61% of master's degrees are now being earned by women. And for the first time, beginning in 2010, the majority of PhDs were being granted to women. This is an incredible revolution in higher education, incredible revolution. I mean, in the 1950s, The basic norm was a woman went to college for 2 years and then married a graduating man and got her MRS degree, her Mrs. degree, that she would get a good catch, that this good catch would provide for her while she stayed at home with the children. Most of the time now, when I ask my young undergraduates, 19, 20, they tell me that they're never even going to get married, that they have no desire or interest in this, that they're very vocation-oriented and profession-oriented. Now, there are some lacking here in terms of what we call the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, math. Women are still underrepresented. There are a variety of programs to encourage young girls in the United States to major in the sciences, to major in math, to major in computer science. But still, that the science part of U.S. higher education tends to still be male-dominated. But in terms of medical school graduates, law school graduates, it's pretty much equal now. Pretty much equal now. Now, overall, there are still more male doctors, but it will equal out over time. In addition, in some schools, like veterinary schools, women are 80% of veterinarians with animals. Really quite amazing. And in some schools of education, social work, etc., women are getting 80% of the professional degrees. Now, does this matter? Yeah, I think it does. Because traditionally, let's say in medical school, in our top medical schools, like say Johns Hopkins or near where I live in Dallas, Texas Southwestern Medical, they do scientific research, medical research. There are federal grants given to them to do medical research, scientific research. Traditionally, money might go for cardiovascular problems. Let's do research on cardiovascular problems. Why? Because guys have heart attacks. Not enough money was dedicated to breast cancer. But when you have women rising to the presidencies of these major medical organizations, which is inevitable, given the way the degrees are going, then inevitably more money will be shifted towards dealing with things that women are concerned about, such as breast cancer and other types of women's issues. When you look at the research, the medical research and the great advances have all been towards male diseases. More money for prostate cancer, for research on prostate cancer, as opposed to vaginal cancer. Now, in terms of work. Some progress, but not equality. Women today earn 77% of what men earn in the United States. Now that's up from the 1960s when it was 63%, or 63 cents to the dollar, now 77 cents to the dollar. Younger women are much closer, who are now clearly better educated. They earn about 93% of what men earn. Women today constitute approximately 50% of the workforce. And women today hold approximately 35% of the professional degrees, although that clearly is going to go to 50 and then beyond 50 over the next 20 to 40 years, simply because of who's graduating from college. Now, the question, of course, it seems to me is that you would ask is, well, if there has been this progress in higher education, progress in professional degrees, why does there continue to be this disparity between men and women in terms of earning? It seems to me there's two basic issues here that one wants to think about. One is that women are still concentrated in professions that have historically received low wages. Administrative, secretarial, nursing, primary school education, etc., that society is deemed to be low paying as opposed to plumbers or mechanics or auto mechanics or electricians, etc. That would be one, again, where women tend to be in positions that historically have been lowly paid because they're female positions. The second, I think, particularly for professional women, which I found the young Argentine women were very worried about. They all wanted to be married, they all had boyfriends, they all intended to be married, but they didn't know what they were going to do when they had a full-time job and profession. and had children, what about family leave? This is in the United States, the big issue, that there is very weak family leave. Who takes care of the children? How do you work and take care of the children? So I think that tends to partly explain why there is continued disparity. The lack of family leave combined with kind of sex stereotyping of professions. Now, politics. The United States is way behind the rest of the world. As I know, in Argentina, of course, you have somewhat of a quota system that would ensure that a certain number of women are elected to federal offices, as well as state offices. There are many other countries, the Nordic countries now have sort of quota systems, ensuring that a certain percentage of women, and I believe in some Nordic countries now, the majority of legislators are female, are women. We have 100 senators, 2 senators per state, and then 435 people in the House of Representatives. So we're a total in Washington of 535. Only 104 are women, or about 17, 18%. Of the 50 governors of states, only 6 are women, 12%. Now, why is this so? Well, traditionally, politics was male-dominated. We don't have any quota system. But to run for office, you need access to money, given that campaigns in the United States are privately financed. Women do not have the same access to money as men. And of course, no woman has served as president of the United States yet, but no woman. And of course, only 2 women ever ran on the national ticket, Geraldine Ferraro in 1984 and Sarah Palin in 2008. In both of those cases, the man was so far behind and desperate, just sought a woman just to make things different. But in both cases, the candidates chose a woman who was not qualified to be president of the United States. So in politics, there's been very, very, compared to the rest of the Western world, whether Latin America, Canada, or Europe, the United States is way, way behind in terms of political power, despite some of these other types of changes and some of these laws. In sports, Title IX has really worked its magic. The United States in the 2012 Olympics finished #1 ahead of China. We won 104 medals, 46 of which were gold. Go team. Thank God for women. U.S. women won 58 of the medals, about 56, 57%, and they won 29 of the gold medals, well over half. So Title IX has transformed the United States into a sports powerhouse for women. You might be surprised in terms of football that it actually is the most popular sport in the United States. I tell you, I know it's going to be a terrible day for you, but one day the men are going to win Mundial. One day the U.S. men are going to win Mundial. And I know that life will end in both Europe and Latin America when that happens, but it's going to happen because so many young people are playing football in the United States. But almost as many women are playing football as young men. This is the most popular sport in the United States. People tend to think it might be American football or baseball or basketball. Actually, more young people are playing football, soccer, what we call soccer, than any other sport. And it's almost equal numbers of men and women. And again, as I said, the U.S. women's national team won the World Cup in 2015 in very, very convincing fashion. Even if we look, interestingly, at some of the teams, Mexico's team, Colombia's team, particularly Colombia's team did quite well. Most of their women were actually attending U.S. colleges, where they were playing football in the U.S. colleges and universities. So this is pretty much where I'll leave it here, and hopefully, we've got to the 45 minutes or so that I thought I would talk and show you some of the statistics, some of the changes, significant changes, even revolutionary changes in the role and status of women in society, including in Western society, including the United States. Enormous changes, but equality, no. And I think probably the two big issues are the question of family leave and the stereotyping of particular types of jobs. So I am ready for the questions.
Thank you, Professor, for this very, very interesting conference. First question.
My name is Mario Asher, and I'm a Fulbrighter 1960. Very nice to have you here. Are you ready to have the first woman president?
First off, I forgot to show you something. It's a very good question. This is what we do not have. Now, whether one agrees with their politics or not, whether one agrees with the politics of Christina, of Dilma, or Michelle, nonetheless, you have to admit this is an enormous achievement for Latin America to have the southern cone countries to have women presidents. There has been a woman president in Costa Rica. There's been a woman president in Panama. There's been a woman president in Guyana. Strangely, the woman president of Guyana was actually an American. So the question, it's a good question, and I'm sorry I forgot to show this, but I'm glad you asked that question. And I think this is real. In my last book, I put this picture, this photo, as a kind of optimism. It really is a beautiful photo. This was at the inauguration, the second inauguration of Michelle Bachelet. Is the United States ready for a woman president? I would say almost certainly. There is clearly going to be a percentage of men who just simply can't accept this and would not vote for Secretary of State Clinton as president. But as a historian, I don't predict. But I will tell you, today is Thursday. If the election was next Tuesday, Secretary of State Clinton would win easily. I mean, she's clearly the favorite to win. This is in part because of the strength that Democrats have in the Electoral College. There are so many states that will simply go Democratic. So I think, now, will there be sound and fury if she becomes president? Will she be subjected to, in the campaign, to sexist attacks? Of course. Will people focus on what she's wearing, how her hairstyle is, etc., when they would never ask such questions of men? Of course. But she has said she is determined to break through what she considers the ultimate ceiling, to smash through. There is, I don't have a crystal ball, but there is the assumption that she is the favorite as we speak here on 13 August in 2015. Other questions? Paula?
Yeah, yes.
So, Steve, hello.
Hello, Paula.
Do you remember who I am?
Absolutely. You haven't changed a bit.
Thanks. That's a big compliment, especially today. But I'd like to ask you, why do you think that the U.S. persists in this weak family leave legislation that's going back? What is your take on this?
Excellent question. Excellent question. I think that there is this kind of cultural debate that a stronger Family Leave Act would weaken the family. It's a kind of peculiar argument that there's one that's kind of a ideological argument that the state should not be involved in these type of family affairs. But the peculiar, and then there's always the issue of paying taxes. Such things cost a lot of money in the Nordic countries. You must raise taxes to pay for these things. So those are those issues. But strangely, there's a kind of that somehow this is going to undermine the traditional family, when of course the traditional family has already been undermined by a variety of changes. I guess, obviously candidate Clinton has proposed that the Family Leave Act, which first happened under her husband, the weak one, needs to be strengthened. Finding that money, we shall see. And of course, the definition of a family is changing quite dramatically. It might be broadcast here. There's an actual show called Family, which suggests that a family is not the normal dad working, mom at home, the 2 children, 3 children, etc., but rather a family could be a gay couple with a baby and that sort of thing. So American society is changing, the demographics of American society is changing quite dramatically, and the relationships between men and women are changing. But we are clear, obviously the United States has been behind in a lot of things. The United States was very far behind in enacting affordable health care or universal health care for all of its citizens. The United States was behind in developing Social Security, developing Medicare. It fights against the traditional small government, individualism, etc. So it's fighting, and so there are a large percentage of the population that hold to those ideas, even as the society is changing quite dramatically. So I guess as a historian, I would say that stronger family leave would eventually occur, but I can't tell you when. It just seems to me inevitable, given the kind of revolutionary changes that are occurring in relationships between men and women and the role and status of women in American society. Other questions?
Marita?
Do you have any information regarding performance in education between men and women? For example,
Well, I have personal experience. I have nothing against men, being one. But I think if I could do my career over, I would go to a university that had nothing but women. Women tend, why are they doing better? Why are a higher percentage graduating? Women tend, they're simply doing better in the classroom than men. Why is this so? I often ask this question in my college classes of men and women. And I ask this question: did your mom treat your brothers the same way that she treated you and your sisters? Oh, that always gets an outraged, furious outbreak by the young woman in the class. No. My mom asked me to help with the dishes. My mom made me make the bed. My mom helped me made me clean the house. My mom didn't ask any of my lazy, no-good brothers. My mom always covered for my brother so his father wouldn't find out. I believe that type of experience takes hold when young people go off to university and they're on their own. Particularly in the United States, where we have people who go to university and live in dorms by themselves. Young men don't show up for class. Why? Because mom wasn't there to get them out of bed. Young men don't know what to do about their laundry. They don't know what to do about getting themselves to the cafeteria. They stay up all night playing computer games. Again, I want to assure you, I have nothing against young men, because I was once a young man, and I have nothing against men in general, but this is my experience. Now, I would also tell you, I think, that I'm not sure that young men and women should go to university at the same time, okay, for this reason. I think that there's a difference in maturity level that is simply innate between young men and women, that young men mature at a little slower rate than young women. I generally think that when young men and women appear at university at the age of 18 or 19, that the young woman is perhaps on average about a year to a year and a half ahead of the male. I had one experience that tended to reinforce that. I had a Fulbright for a year in Finland. Now, as you perhaps know, Finnish students finish #1 in the world on virtually every standardized test, and that other countries from all over the world, including Argentina and the United States, send teams to Finland to study their educational system. But here was one difference. They kept students in high school, collegio, whatever, until they were 19. Then, it's kind of sexist, but all young men have to do 1 year of mandatory military service. It's kind of homeland defense against the Russians ever invade them again, as they did in 1940. So the young women were at the university beginning at 19, and the young men started at the age of 20. But the young men found out that the sergeant was not going to make their bed for them, that the sergeant did not kiss them on the cheek in the morning, that the sergeant demanded that they be responsible and punctual during that year of military service. So then I found, there was quite a bit of difference the way this 20-year-old man, not only was he was a little bit older, 2 years older than, say, starting in Argentina and the United States, but that he had had this experience of living on his own, obviously supervised, and obviously enormous amounts of demands were placed upon him. So I see that, as a kind of interesting example. But I will tell you that it's always young men who don't show up for class. It's always young men who turn their papers in late. It's always young men who forget their writing utensils or who forget to bring their test booklets. What I sometimes say in class, as we're approaching an exam, I ask some of the young women to bring some extra test booklets because clearly some of the young men are going to forget them. And so I said, in order to help them, spare them from my wrath, you bring those things for them so that when they goof off, they'll have a woman taking care of them. Of course, I'm only reinforcing the problem by doing that. So that has been my experience. But that's why many universities in the United States are trying to start out at 50-50 and are actually admitting young men who have somewhat less qualifications than young women. But then the graduation rates diverge quite dramatically. The young men drop out of college. And it's essentially not because they lack the intellectual ability, but they lack the maturity, the emotional maturity, and self-responsibility. Again, I'm a guy. I have nothing against guys, but I have to tell the truth of what's happening. Other questions?
Other question, comment?
Discussion? Anybody want to say anything about Argentina? Make a comparison about Argentina?
As educators, we see similar things. It takes the guy's number to find out what they want to do. So there are exceptional guys who know what they want to do and study hard. We see that in our college as well. Although, our college has far fewer men because we teach languages. But
I might know Paul is the rector of Lenguas Vivas. Yes.
Yeah, so we have far fewer, but we do see what you're saying. It's the girls are always looking after the guys we have in classes.
Yes. Well, we can't suppress the maternal instinct. Perhaps for those of you who might have children in the future, you might think about how you raise your little boy and little girl equally, and ask the same of them. Many of my young female students vow that they would do that when they have children. But of course, a lot of them say, I'm never getting married.
No more questions? Come. Yes.
Yo trabajo.
Un momento.
Yo trabajo en violencia familiar.
Wait.
Un poco. Repita usted, por favor.
Sí, yo trabajo en violencia familiar. Y a mí me sorprendió cuando usted dijo que a partir de una ley del vicepresidente de Estados Unidos mejoró mucho la situación en ese tema. Acá, por el contrario, cada vez tenemos mejores leyes y tenemos más asesinatos de mujeres a mano de sus parejas. Es decir, que el hecho de haber tenido mejor legislación y más organismos que realmente las asisten, no ha significado una disminución en la cantidad de asesinatos de mujeres.
All right. This is a very excellent question. This is a situation where laws and culture, which is more important? Well, both are important. Do laws affect culture? I do believe. Does culture affect laws? It's one thing to pass law, it's another to bring about a cultural change. It's hard for me to explain why, but the general view in the United States is, okay, you're in a neighborhood, and next door, you hear a woman screaming. Okay. It is now perceived as your public responsibility. Do not go over there. Do not get involved, because that would become very dangerous. But get on the phone. There are 3 numbers, 911. Call the police immediately. And by and large, there's been a kind of cultural shift in the United States that states that it is everyone's public responsibility to do something about this. Now, how I explain this cultural shift, it's very difficult. I mean, there is the law that was passed in 1993. I suppose what reinforces it is that there have been some prominent cases of very well-known people who've been sent to jail for a long time, 20 years, 30 years, life. I suppose that makes a statement. But it's not just that, that somehow, in terms of, I think the media has played a role. I think that television and film and radio and the internet have played roles in suggesting that domestic violence or violence against women is unacceptable. And it's not only that it's unacceptable, but that you as a citizen have an obligation to react to this. That it's no longer a private matter. That what was historically thought as private has now become public. How you get to that, I think, is difficult to know, and the relationship between law and culture is kind of complex. It's obviously the chicken and the egg, which came first. It's not but that's what I think the issue is. It's not merely to have the law in Argentina, but rather to affect a cultural change. So does that mean the president speaks out, as President Obama did, and he's made several statements on this issue? Does it mean that people who lead media empires start campaigns on this issue as public responsibility? Does it mean that in presenting some sorts of drama and situational comedies, that those who are film and TV producers take on this issue? Does it mean that people who write newspaper stories bring on this issue? I think it's a process which involves large numbers of people in influence and power to take a stand.
Sorry, do you mention about the female code here in Argentina and other countries? Do you think that that's a good policy to implement in the US, or do you think there are other better ways to include women in policy?
Well, excellent question. There are 3 or 4 ways I would answer it. There is no chance ever in the United States that we will have a quota system that ensures a certain percentage of women be elected. Americans, that would be a cultural taboo. Quotas are simply a cultural taboo in the United States. Now, Americans would generally believe that there could be ways to increase the number of women in political life. There are a variety of organizations, something called Emily's List, which supports women in politics. But I think that the key thing to getting more women in politics would be to get private money out of politics through public financing of campaigns. One of the bizarre situations that is occurring in American politics right now is I think that the New York Times calculated that so far the various candidates, and I think there are 17 in the Republican Party and 5 or 6 in the Democratic Party, that they have raised, I think the figure was $150 million already. Then they found out that 50 families had contributed about 100 of the $150 million. These are, each one of the candidates seems to have one billionaire supporting them. Well, access to women, that's a bad situation to begin with, but the access that women candidates might have to billionaires is very, very limited. So if there was to be any way to increase the number of women in politics, it would seem to me in the United States to go that way, because I can assure you that there will never be a law passed in which a certain number that it's guaranteed that a certain number of women gain political life. Now, the quota, the way it's worked, I know in countries, in the Nordic countries, the quota has actually gotten people so used to women being in politics that there are some legislatures in the northern countries where women are now the majority. There have been women who have been prime ministers, etc. Finland, for example, is a woman prime minister. So then the change, people found out that the world was not going to end, that the majority of people in the legislature were women, etc. So I think it's, in the United States, it's a real long and difficult struggle. Now, would there be symbolic importance that would lead to some change if there was a woman as president? Yeah, I think so. But to me, the big issue in the United States is money in politics and the corruption that money in politics is bringing about. And the incredible idea that several candidates have like one donor, a billionaire, is just giving them money to run. Or in the case of Donald Trump, he says I have $7 billion, so I can run and finance my own campaign. Those are the big issues.
No more questions or comments? Thank you again,
Thank you very much.
Professor Rabe.
Thank you. Thank you for being the moderator.
No. Interesting, women's and foreign policy.
Women in foreign policy, one of the interesting issues.
Because there are several cases.
I wish someone had asked the question about women in foreign policy. I tend to think that women who are in foreign policy positions tend to be more aggressive because they're kind of trying to suggest, well, the stereotype about us is wrong. So, for example, the issue of going after Osama bin Laden, the vice president was opposed to it. The Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, was against going after Osama bin Laden. The one person who was in favor of it was Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State. Go for it. And then you look at people like Madeleine Albright.
Exactly.
She was pretty aggressive. Condoleezza Rice, Margaret Thatcher.
Exactly.
They're all quite aggressive in terms of their approach to foreign policy. But I think it's almost kind of a defensive reaction.
Sure. And it's interesting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. And very good question. Very good question.
I'm related to Texas A&M through marketing. It's my field, and they have a very strong retail marketing school.
Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Sir. I'd like to meet you guys.
Retired as the U.S. Foreign Service Officer.
You retired here too. What is that? A good choice.
I'm from Chile.
You're from Chile. When did women in Chile get organized?